Hi there, everybody. Welcome to the show. Thanks for watching. We've got a treat in store for you coming up as we chat to our good friend, Dr. James Dilley. Who is James Dilley? Well, he probably won't like me saying this, and to be honest, it's not wholly accurate, but if you haven't come across James and his work before, it kind of gets us in the ballpark if you think of Ray Mears, but transported back in time a few thousand years. How would you put it, Rupert?
I think that's a pretty good description. And I want to talk to James about his cosplay.
I'm on the wrong podcast.
Clearly. Welcome, James. It's really great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yay. I suppose the thing is to kick it, like that was just a cheeky get us in here. But for those people that don't know who you are, how would you describe who you are, what you do, and how you got here?
Well, I mean, I guess my role covers a couple of bases and a variety of different areas. I guess I'm a bit of an experimental archaeologist, a bit of an experiential archaeologist, a consultant, just a craftsperson. There's no sort of overall sort of cover theme. If I ever do media stuff, it's just a prehistoric technology expert, but that feels like such a broad loaded term because I'm not an expert of all of prehistory. No. In every place. I try to do a lot and will try to do a lot in one lifetime, but I won't be able to do it all, unfortunately. But I guess my two main crafts are flint knapping and bronze casting, and all the various others attached, woodworking, you name it. And I make replicas for museums around the world, or as props for media, or actually do on-screen appearances for archaeology TV projects as well, or do book consultation as well. You name it. Every day is slightly different.
Yeah, I mean, you're the sort of guy that's likely to pop up on Digging for Britain and on archaeological shows like that.
Well, we've been, I can't say surprised, but we have been amused on a number of occasions when we've gone to a visitor somewhere, a visitor centre somewhere, where there's been movies going on, educational movies going on. There's James again. There's been a few of those. Ireland, where else? Just all over the place. Yes.
Yeah.
You do.
The thing is, James, that you went to the trouble of getting a doctorate. Did you feel that as, in what you do? What's actually what's the doctorate in?
So my doctorate is in the mechanics and economy of composite surfboards. I'm not sure why you're laughing, Michael.
It's not quite the answer I was expecting.
What
of composite surfboards?
Why are you laughing?
No.
People buy a lot of surfboards, Michael.
No, I've never bought a surfboard in my life.
Yeah, people. No, I am kidding. My PhD research was looking at the hunting strategy and hunting equipment of modern humans in Northwest Europe. During the Origination period,
right,
which is an early sub-period of the Upper Paleolithic.
Yes, indeed. Oh my goodness! And I shouldn't think that's a common doctorate to have, common PhD to have. But was that a deliberate thing to do to elevate you, give you some kind of platform from which to? I mean, you manage a business around this, from the whole. Enterprise of all these things going, the skills you've developed and the knowledge you've attained. Was that it?
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess, and I've had AncientCraft since I was 16, and I set that up just as a young, mid-teen, with some parental assistance to set up a website and sort of how to run a small business. But I don't have any archaeologists in the family or family friends at all. It just sort of came from watching, I guess, the predecessors of myself doing flint knapping or something similar on TV, or the wonderful Young Archaeologist Club. run by the Council of British Archaeology, that was perfect for me to start to move in those spheres. I'd always wanted to get a doctorate in archaeology, and I can somehow remember a really early journey to school, and it must have been primary school, because I can remember where we were on the route saying to my mum in the car, I want to be a doctor of archaeology. You know, who has those kinds of thoughts at that kind of age? It's, you know, I want to go and play football with my friends later, which I did plenty of as well, but to have that as well, I guess my path and destiny was there in front of me. I always wanted to do it. But in terms of what it gave me, to be truly honest about it, unfortunately, a lot of particularly media companies and some museums, they won't take people seriously unless you've got an academic title, which is ridiculous. Because there are so many incredibly knowledgeable researchers that don't have academic backgrounds, but you know, they just don't have those letters in front of their name, which is just crazy. And unfortunately, the media world is even more shallow.
Yes.
You know, that you could have a title in whatever, even if it's not related to the project. It doesn't matter for them. They've got an expert. And I'm certainly not for the so-called expert style. I mean, it's always good, but they certainly have a shallow approach. But it's certainly improved my academic skill set to be able to be critical, and improved my writing style as well. So as well as elevating myself from sort of a public facing side, it very much elevated me as a researcher as well. And for my research that, you know, as I can see from a couple of people in the comments that have come across it, I was looking at the projectile technology of these early modern humans that were using antler for their spear tips, which is a bit of a weird material over razor sharp flint or obsidian. But I wanted to work out why, because why would you spend all the time carving an antler spear tip? And you can go away and have a look at it on my YouTube channel. But essentially, it was potentially to show that these early modern humans were purposely over-engineering these antler spear tips to preserve the valuable spear shaft. Because, you know, we go outside today and there's woodland everywhere, but during the Upper Paleolithic, during the Ice Age, Northwest Europe would be like a grassland. There wouldn't be many trees at all. So that'd be the valuable stuff, the antler.
I'm going to bring this comment up, actually, from, whoops, I've clicked twice when I shouldn't have done, Chipper Chap. Who already knows your stuff and makes the comment that your insights into the use of bone points in timber-rare environments was a stroke of genius. It's not something that you see discussed, is it? At all?
It's not. And I think that's what I started to think about early in the research. And I suppose, you know, this particular case study for these split-based antler points is interesting, but actually I think the real value in what I was hoping to do was actually to point people towards the bigger picture of looking at objects, because we look at, say, a flint axe that has survived, but we very rarely have the wooden handle. We rarely think about that because it hasn't survived. But we have got a handful of examples, and although you could use an axe in the hand, it's clearly intended for that. But it's the same with a spear. That you get the spearheads survive because they're often stone, and the spearheads are sort of the sexy bit. They're the exciting bit. But actually, a spear is not a spear without the shaft. You can have a spear that is just a shaft. It could just be a pointed piece of wood, but a spear point alone does not make a spear. So that's the more important part, in my opinion. And there are many, many other examples out there in the archaeology that actually, if you think a bit more laterally, not much, but think a little more laterally, and start to assess the materials involved and some of the processes, and that's where we get into the world of experimental archaeology, how important the repercussions can be and what we can infer. And what I inferred in the end was that they over-engineered these clever split-based points that would take a lot longer to make than stone points, because they had come up with the early concept for the electrical fuse, just without the electrics, that the over-engineered spear point would break before the valuable component, the spear shaft.
You've brought, interestingly, that's brought us to a point where I was going to, a question I was going to save till much later, because it's a little bit sort of up there, but it's sort of esoteric. But experimental archaeology, the way you do it, and the insights, as you've just described, that you can get by doing it, how much is that getting fed back up the chain or down the chain, whichever way you look at it, into academia itself?
I would say that it's been fed upwards and downwards in both directions fairly strongly.
Oh, good.
In fact, an awful lot of research, if it doesn't have an experimental component to it, it's often questioned for, well, why didn't you test that? Because there are so many specialists out there who have the practical knowledge or skill or can access whatever material that you're looking at to be able to support research. So an awful lot of what I do is make replicas or demonstrate a process for some kind of research, because it's relatively easy to do, unless it's something incredibly complicated like a big structure, which I guess for structures that are somewhat behind European research institutes that often have the drive, the finances and the support to do bigger experimental projects. So I think we're lagging behind a little in the UK, but it's very much accepted and encouraged, if not, as I said, questioned if it's absent.
You bring to mind one of my favourite quotes from Bruce Bradley, the American archaeologist, who a gripe of his is that he said that there are so many academic papers written about hunting in prehistory by people who have never been out and so much as shot a rabbit. And I think there is a lot of truth in that. I wanted to ask you...
Can you bring your microphone a bit closer, Rupert?
I can.
Yes,
I wanted to ask you... so you experiment with and you have made replicas of, whatever the tools might be. So let's take arrow tips as an example. And through time... so, whether it's, different periods through the Neolithic and going through the Bronze Age. So you have these different styles that arise at different times. So have you, from your experimental archaeology, have you seen that is a developmental line of efficiency? Are they getting better over time? Or are they just different styles being created by different peoples?
I think you have a mixture of a variety of different possibilities. And certainly as we've seen with Upper Paleolithic groups, as an example, who had a variety of different spear tips. I've mentioned those origination split base points, but you get a variety throughout the origination, and they actually step away from using the design that I looked at. So presumably they thought that actually it is too over-engineered, too much time involved, but that could be for a future study. But even for something like arrowheads elsewhere, clearly that design change is encouraged by something, but what it is sometimes quite hard to clearly define because we don't have solid evidence that backs it up. Sure, you could test it to an experimental level with very controlled conditions and say, oh yes, well the pointy one is more aerodynamic or it has a greater penetration depth. But was there just cultural pressure to make a particular style that might have encouraged a slightly different approach? Or as you get with transverse or chisel points across much of Europe and wider afield in the Middle Neolithic, you get these arrowheads that are very, very quick to make, that are still pretty lethal, but without the pointiness of a leaf point or oblique point that comes later. But on the other side, you don't get a huge amount of hunted wild game. So why are they making these arrowheads? Almost certainly for knocking over people. But then why would you make a wide-shaped tip if you're just essentially still hunting a large-ish mammal? Or is it because there was a social taboo about killing people and having a wide tip wouldn't have caused so much penetration, but it would still cause noticeable flesh wounds? Or was it just that they were quicker to make? It unfortunately is one of those that we can just never answer clearly. And that is the problem, that I can give you some reasons, and it's down to you as the researcher or you as the listener at home to take those pieces and suggestions from a specialist that's generally not trying to push their own agenda at all. They're just giving reasons and options and logic, and it's for you to identify.
Right.
So it's interesting the flat blades, because I would assume that would cause the arrow to be less accurate. Aerodynamically,
It can do,
it's
but not always, because you do. I mean, if you've come across the really, really wide Middle British Neolithic arrowheads with the big hook on them, and some of them are massive, they're just ridiculous sized things. I've loosed arrows that have gone in slightly odd directions, but for similar examples, they've flown as straight as the, I guess the proverb or suggestion, straight as an arrow. And the lethality of them, that they'll penetrate well over 20 centimetres into NATO quality ballistics gel, which is more than enough to knock over a large mammal. So they're lethal enough. The suggestion when we've posted stuff online is that, oh, well, you know, I hunt with broadheads or, you know, with a compound bow, which of course they wouldn't have had in the Neolithic, and this wouldn't go through a scapula or a rib. And so, well, perhaps that wasn't the intention, because but having something that does so much damage or penetrates so deeply, it might have had the intention that it didn't go as deeply into a wound, or that it caused more blunt damage. And those are the components that we could test them to the nth degree to say that these arrows can do X, but we will just never have that setting for how they were being used or deployed.
I'll do my best to put some images on screen in the edited version so people understand what it is you're saying. There's a question from John Sherwood, Rupert.
Oh, okay. We'll both do it then. Go on, you stick it up.
It says, when and if you find items where the duplication initially seems unknown or elusive, what's your method for working out the technique?
It's a good question. I'm trying to think of an example that I can start to look at it, well, piece by piece, quite literally. Generally, I don't have that so much of a problem with stone tools or stoneworking, because particularly with something like flint knapping, there are quite set fracture mechanics and rules that I have to stick to. So you can look at, let's say, an axe or an arrowhead that's slightly unusual. I can usually picture how I would work my way into it. For other artifacts that are made using methods outside of flint knapping, for example, like a big shaped stone or something, then you can look at it from a very basic level. Let's say it is a very large pecked, worked megalith from a site somewhere around the world that has really amazing geometric shapes, like a stele in sort of Central Europe. On a very basic level, you could hand peck that decoration or shaping. It would work, but it would take possibly a very, very long time and an awful lot of effort, and possibly a lot of tools to do that amazing work, and many hundreds of hours maybe. And at a very basic level, you could do that through that method. But so it must have been done somehow, but we've got that baseline. If people in prehistory were able or had come across a method that was quicker, that perhaps used some kind of equipment, slightly more complex equipment, then great. But unfortunately, if we just don't have the evidence to support that, we can't exactly say, oh yes, well, they used this fancy sort of swinging hammer method, for example. If we don't have the evidence, we can't extrapolate too much further than that, but we know it must have been done. And often the method for an experimental archaeologist is to find that most absolute basic but effective method. Effective might mean a very long time, it might not be efficient, but it might be effective. And then we can work from there. Then we can start to say, oh, well, they could have used this method, but they would have needed to have done this. Or there's this piece of evidence from a site nearby, or that's perhaps slightly later in time, and that could suggest they did it in this way. But again, we're going back to that suggesting and possibly and could be. We never like to say for certain, just because evidence can change. And that's, again, down to that interpretation. But often the joy, I suppose, of experimental archaeology is that you will have some certainties. As I said, that baseline, there is a certainty that this method must have been done in a way that may have been born from this most basic method. But we just can't say for certain.
For those of you watching the recording of this show on YouTube, you may be wondering how come there are being chat questions being introduced and I can't see any chat. Well, the answer to that question is that we're recording this in front of an audience of our Patreon supporters. And just watching the recording of this. Mention of Patreon, if you want to have a look at the advantages of joining us on Patreon, please do look in the links down below. As we speak, at this moment, we're just 350 subscriptions or thereabouts away from 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. So if you haven't done already, please do hit the subscribe button. You may help us get over that 100,000 subscriber mark. While I'm mentioning support, there is also the GÖBEKLI TEPE to Stonehenge project, which is ongoing, and you can contribute to by clicking the link down below and find out more information about that. Sorry, that had to be done.
Well said, that man. Listen, I'm not going to put Andy's comment on screen, not necessary. But Andy, Chipper Champ Andy has asked, what do you think cup and ring markings were?
Oh, should we let Michael answer that question first?
Well, I think they are. I haven't thought about cup and ring markings for a long, long time, but I haven't come to a definitive answer than that, except that I associate them with water or liquid of some sort. Whatever that means, I do not know. And the other thing I took away from Kilmartin Glen, Achnabrek, and what's the other site up there? It is Achnabrek.
Ken Barn, you're probably...
Ken Barn, yeah. But I think Achnabrek we were at is when the guy we were on a tour with, and we had an archaeologist with us, and he pointed out that when you hit quartz with stone or with other bits of quartz, you get illuminations. And I'm thinking, oh, that must have been magical way back then. So I don't know, water and sparks flying in the dark. Who knows?
The problem with the water side of it, though, is where you find them on vertical faces.
Yeah, I don't know.
Unless they were originally horizontal and turned upright later.
Yeah, exactly that, yes, which is always a possibility unless you've got the absolute dates ascribed to.
Well, yes, that is the problem. And I guess with some of the sites, as Rupert suggested, that they may have once been pieces of rock that was somewhere in the landscape that were either pecked and have then been moved, or were moved and then pecked. Which came first is quite difficult to determine. It's a bit like the cairn in Kilmartin that has the wonderful Neolithic stag heads in a Dunragig cairn that almost certainly would have been a standing stone somewhere else before those were added, because I can tell you, being under there and then trying to peck these stags would be quite challenging, to say the least. It'd be much easier if they were elsewhere. But as you said, to work quartz onto rock gives that small illumination and that sort of gunpowdery smell as well. And certainly for somewhere like Achnabrek, it overlooks a very open, wide valley. The sound of that rhythmic hitting against the surface, and possibly as people got closer, a smell and even little bits of light might have added a huge amount of theatre to it. And I have I would say wonderful story, but a more amusing story of working quartz myself on Arran as part of a timber circle burning quite a few years ago now. And the audience were a large group, were sort of in the circle as it burned.
Kenny Brophy.
Yes, with Kenny and Gavin. And I was working the quartz, so every so often people would see this little flash of light, and they'd sort of like, what's going on? And eventually a clever person in the audience realised that if they just shone their torch on me, that they'd be able to see what was going on, but it completely killed the sort of slight illumination. I guess the effect of the whole thing was killed in torchlight, but was quite amusing. But it is surprisingly effective. So I would imagine that the theatre of it as much might have played into it.
Well done. I haven't given them a thought for quite a while, so where
Yeah,
angels
too
fear
many
to tread that one.
possibilities,
Yeah.
really, aren't they? It's a bit like what were stone balls for, and there's just
not carved stone balls.
let's
Made
not
any
go
stone
there.
balls recently?
Let's not go
All I
there.
can tell you is they are horrible to make.
I believe you. I believe
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. What?
Andrew had a question. Where do you get your glass blocks from? And have you got any left-handed extra-large antler hammers for sale at AncientCraft? We've got very hard flint round here.
It's all very hard, Andrew. I'm afraid. But yes, I'm certain if I'm picturing the antler hammers we have got left-handed angled antlers. From memory, that has to come from the left, or is it right antler? Either way, order one. Put a note on it asking for a left-handed antler, and I will not test them because that's for you to wear them down, but I will make sure that in my left hand it lines up with how you want it to be. For the glass blocks, they did come from a sort of glass college in northern Scotland, but they unfortunately, I don't think they either make them or produce that kind of glass anymore. So I was fortunate to have a huge stock of it, I guess possibly when they were selling the last quantity of it, and we just have it sort of stocked up.
While you're at it, James, give yourself a plug for AncientCraft, and please do.
I guess I should. If people haven't come across our website or social media, do look us up, either my name or AncientCraft. We're UK based, so it would be a .co.uk website, or on social media we're AncientCraft UK. But take a look on our shop, that if, like Andrew, you'd like an antler hammer of all things to keep yourself entertained, breaking some flint to make your own stone tools, or you can even buy your own stone tools or bronze weapons as well, that all come from the website. But if you don't want to buy one to sit on the mantelpiece, you can come and make one for yourself, which both Rupert and Michael are going to do at some point. We will drag them to Norfolk. We could do it as a special that we can watch them, or us, or now this is you and me, patrons, not the other two. We will be able to watch and enjoy as they struggle with the flint napping.
That'd be wonderful.
Then I guess we'll give them the fun of casting something in bronze, just so they don't feel too bad about it. Maybe.
We did say ages ago. We did say it would be really nice to make a film that was Michael and Rupert make a knife or something like that. Just come and actually make a good bronze blade with you. That would be fun. Yes.
Yeah. Well, even just over a weekend, we'll do maybe 10 minutes, half an hour of stuff to film for the others, and then the rest of it we'll just chat and drink beer in the sunshine.
That's always a good idea.
Yeah. Our neighbours are a pub at the workshop, so it's 92 yards from the workshop gate to the pub.
Can
various yards on the way back.
Excellent.
Oh, that sounds perfect. Okay. Interesting question from Daniel, who asks, has James done any work in the manufacture of paint for cave or shelter walls?
Yeah.
You have?
Well done,
the answer
Daniel.
is yes.
Wow.
Have done a variety of pigments. Some from ochre, some from other types of rocks or materials, and I guess the binding agent we've used egg, saliva, blood even, and just water, and use them for a whole variety of methods. I think
whose blood, and was it deliberate?
Well, let's say a flint napping injury occurred beforehand, and it was a case of, let's use this opportunity because you ain't going to get it too many times. I put my life on the line for science.
Fantastic.
Actually, it worked poorly.
That's a whole other question, isn't it? Health and safety in prehistory.
Health and safety, yeah. But blood is not a particularly good binder because, imagine dry blood on a surface. As it dries and the cells shrink, it will just flake away. Whereas something like egg as an emulsifying agent is so much better, so much better. And that, that's why people used it for sort of tempera paint. Imagine those sort of Roman sarcophagi with the amazing painted face on. It's essentially the same. But as long as it's got some sort of emulsifier agent that won't dry out, or at least when it does dry out, it doesn't shrink a huge amount, so it leaves the pigment where you want it to be, then it's fine. But I've used a whole variety of different methods. But generally what I've found is that once the pigment is on the surface, it does take an awful lot to remove it. I mean, ochre is an amazing staining agent, whether it be on clothes, your skin, whatever. So you can kind of imagine that if people were applying ochre to themselves, which they almost certainly were, that perhaps the days afterwards people would be walking around with like an ochre tan as it was starting to sort of wash off and come off their skin, like a sort of visual hangover. It would have been quite an amazing sight, like a body mascara with it sort of going down their body from sort of sweat or rain. It must, you never think of those sort of post-ceremony moments where people are a bit exhausted and a bit hungover with sort of ochre running down their face.
Interesting.
But it would have been quite a sight.
Dan, actually,
Joris,
he also
on,
says
Rupert.
along the Mexican border, the binder appears to have been deer marrow and sotol sap.
Wow.
So
Fat is really good.
Yeah, interesting.
I was going to say, Joris has a question. Forgive me if I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Joris. Do you use bowls for smelting tin and copper?
So for smelting, we use a variety of different methods, both in a pot, in a crucible, but we do it sometimes at the bottom of a furnace, in a clay-lined furnace, and let it sort of work its way down into the bottom. And then usually you get like a thick blister copper that you then dig out and crush so that all the fine silica copper slag or tin slag is just powdered away. And any of the metallic-y parts you can then pick out because they won't crush, they'll deform, but they won't crush, and that's how you can pick them out. But often we just pick out the big mass and then put it in a pan as you would trying to fish gold nuggets out of a stream, and the heavy bits will stay in the pan. And actually, I guess that's another plug that I can throw in, that we do for the first time in Norfolk have a copper smelting and bronze casting weekend. So you can come and smelt some copper yourself and discover the chemistry behind it. Because we often get asked, and I think we've talked about it on the podcast before, how would people have discovered metal? How would they have come across it? And that's what we'll explore without giving it away, because that would take away the discovery on the day.
Goodness gracious me! I mean, it's a plot spoiler to ask the question. It's all very well, discovering metal, but smelting, etc., and getting the end result is a multitask process. And you think, how did that come together? How it's like the brewing of beer or something like that. It's a multitask process. You can't just happen by accident in front of you and you have a eureka moment. It's bringing of several processes together to get the end result. I mean, do you have a feeling for that?
Yeah, but very much so multi-stepped, and it would vary dramatically depending on what ore that you're trying to work. Okay. Because if it's something like a sulfide ore, you can't just put it in a fire or even a charcoal fire and try to smelt it, because the sulfur will inhibit it. You would need to roast that off first. So you'd need to go through a couple of processes that might have come about through happenstance, that you notice, oh, well, okay, that's worked on that occasion. Or perhaps when people came across copper in a metallic state to begin with, it perhaps gives you a couple of cheat steps. It's, oh, well, that comes from that location. Those funny rocks that are also a bit unusually heavy that come from the same place. I wonder if there's something going on there. So, but as I said, that would explore that more on the day. And I've just noticed, I guess, a follow on the question, and natural ventilation on hillsides. Yes, that is another method, and yes, was used in the Bronze Age, particularly for some of the Austrian copper mining and smelting sites. The easiest way to smelt is just have a big horseshoe-shaped furnace and just let the wind do the work, which is ideal.
Wonderful. Our patrons know some stuff.
Oh, they do.
Often a lot more than we do.
Well, we're just the vehicles for discussion. You know, it's them that we're relying on to come up with the interesting stuff.
Yes,
Ain't
absolutely.
that the truth?
Absolutely. Do you know, this is kind of away from your flint work, I mean, I was joking about talking to you about cosplay, but
No, he wasn't. James, he wasn't.
Well,
He wasn't.
the thing about so aside from your weapons work and your technology work, that the clothing that you do use, so we know, later, for example, places like Must Farm finding textiles on the loom and things like that. What's your decision-making process in how you choose, what you wear for, putting yourself in that zone, if you like? I find it intriguing.
Yeah, and that is an interesting question, and it partly relies on sort of what I was talking about earlier about the absolute very basic, because you can look at the one example of clothing that we might have, let's say Ötzi the Iceman, which is like the one assemblage we have of somewhat earlier in prehistory of several garments of clothing, or the one other legging or a few other bits that have been found in the Hauslebiok Pass, but that's never going to be a representation of what everyone was wearing throughout Europe, or the Danish oak coffin burials as another example, but from the Middle Bronze Age. But again, that's a very, very small sample.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just relying on fragments of textile. So generally, I try to go with the absolute basic. And then if people were able to have clothing that was far more elaborate, then good for them. But if we just don't have the evidence, then we can't really sort of show people what it might have been, because for things like needles, you get loads of needles in northwestern Europe in the Paleolithic and Mesolithic, but once you get to the Neolithic and Bronze Age in Britain, needles are just absent. Why? We don't know.
My Lord. Well, there's a rabbit hole.
Odd.
Goodness gracious me.
But they do appear elsewhere in Europe, but strangely not in Britain. So that then suggests that the way that they're making clothing is less perhaps fitted clothing, but perhaps more sort of wrap clothing, perhaps, or relying on, not loincloths, but, large, like sarong type clothing potentially. So quite basic.
Yes. Because once you think about it, you realise how fundamental, the needle is. Having a needle, that's quite a revolution. Isn't it?
Yeah, and if any of you watchers out there saw me with Steve Backshaw on the Ice Age Apocalypse program, there was a section where I was talking to Michaela Strachan about the importance of the needle to create fitted clothing that would allow humans to operate in colder and colder environments to keep you nice and warm. So there are loads of different components about certain artifacts that are missing, because you can still sew two things together without a needle. It's just much easier with a needle.
Okay, yeah.
It certainly doesn't prevent you doing that. But I can assure you that poking a hole with something sharp and then trying to just, even with a waxed piece of thread or sinew, to then try and poke it through the hole and sort of feed it in, it's just tricky. It really is. Doable, but tricky.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but the depiction that we're used to of Ötzi the Iceman is of him being semi-naked. And you think, what was he doing up in the Alps with no clothes on?
Well, I think that's because they're hedging their bets on what the clothing was.
Yeah.
And there's still some debate on whether the jacket had sleeves, for example. And it appears to have a section surviving that could be part of the shoulder section. Right. But it's only really the back and partial body wraparound that survives. But within them, you can still see the sweat stains. So it's certainly up against his body. But whether he had something underneath that or over the top remains debated. I think for him to be at 11,000 feet with one layer is extremely hazardous or unlikely. But again, it's hard to say. He may have just been desperately running away.
Yeah, but also, he was killed. It's quite possible that if he had anything decent on, that might have been taken from his body anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Why would you leave a decent a decent jacket to moulder in the mountains. Oh, I'll have that. What shoe size is he?
Yeah.
You know, that's what I think. We've had a whole flurry of questions. Does James do any physical field archaeology?
It's a good question, and the answer is no, not really. I
don't know how you'd have the time.
No, it's a busy boy.
Yeah. I do work with a lot of field archaeologists and field archaeology companies, and sometimes I've found out on site when they've found something really amazing that they want me to see it there in context. But in terms of doing it myself, I very rarely get the chance, unfortunately. Would like to. I go on field walks, but in terms of actually excavating myself, I unfortunately just cannot do everything. On the odd occasion when Southampton are doing some excavating and I happen to be in the area, I'll try and go along for a short period. But as you said, it's unfortunately a little too busy, and you can't do everything. I know where my skill set is, and it's not there.
But to give an idea of how busy you are, what are the last few things that you've been up to over the past couple of months, James?
So over the last couple of months or so, we've had workshops here in Norfolk for the last few weekends. I've been at a few different universities teaching students flint knapping and metalworking. We've also been planning an awful lot for the year ahead as we start to get into the summer months. So actually we've had a couple of weeks of being here in Norfolk at home, but it has mostly been planning or podcasting or email answering or planning for some events, because we have got some really good events coming up this year, and do recommend people go over to the calendar page on our website. But an awful lot of media project planning, which I wish I could go into, because there are some really, really funny stories that are occurring, but that will be for a future one when it's happened. It's one of those things that I do not want to jinx it in the build-up. It's an awful lot of media planning stuff along the way.
Are you working with other production companies? Are you producing? I know you produce media yourselves, and here's a good point to mention your partner, Em, which is rude not to have mentioned before, because she's absolutely intrinsic part of the enterprise, isn't she?
A very fine camera woman she is too.
Yes.
So Emma and I went to school together. So she remembers when I was starting to get into archaeology and sort of coming in with stone tools that I had made.
She knew what she was getting into.
Amazing. She's still stuck with you. Wow.
Yeah. Well, it kept me out of trouble. Well, just put me into another kind of trouble, I guess. But it wasn't loitering on streets, just loitering around ancient monuments, which I guess is slightly better. The way that we work an awful lot is that, let's say an archaeology company has found something, and they want to create a handling collection for when they do community work. They'll approach the two of us for if it's flint work, that will be mostly me. If it's bronze work, it might be the two of us. Or if it's ornamentation, then it will be mostly Em, because she does an awful lot of work with amber or jet or shale, works very closely with the likes of Dr. Alison Sheridan, or a lot of the other specialists. I mean, everyone knows Alison. Yes. She's like the matriarch of prehistoric archaeology for sort of the Neolithic and Bronze Age. So that is a busy person. She is a busy person. But,
we love Alison. She got even busier when she retired. It's absolutely ridiculous.
I know. Amazing how that happens. But Em's working on an awful lot of stuff alongside, and she's recently finished working with Leicester Museums, who have done an exhibition on the Cossington necklace and burial assemblage, which they've got their exhibition ongoing, but you can see the videos of that on our YouTube channel. So we often have projects that are totally independent of each other. And I'll get to sort of, as I'm typing away here, listen to these conversations with these specialists who I know sometimes by voice and name, and oh yes, you're chatting to so and so, and sort of recognise a laugh. So it's amazing that you're sort of hearing these things going on on the other side of the room almost. But as you said, Rupert, photography skills comes from a background in yacht photography. So absolutely worlds apart, but so incredibly useful that whether it be videography or photography, it's so important to archaeology now.
Brilliant. Actually, you've been abroad a couple of times relatively recently. What was all that about?
We have. We've just come back from Gdansk in Poland because we were there for the Amber Expo show to restock our amber for Em to run her workshops for amber working. And if you wanted an experience to see, I think the word bling now only resides in archaeological circles, but the raw material for bling. And if you want to see mountains and mountains of it, millions of euros worth of it, that's the place to go, because it's so cheap to fly there, and cheap tickets, but not cheap to buy, unfortunately. But they would sort of put this lump of amber on a table and be like, oh yes, you can have a look at this and pick it up, and oh yes, that's 30,000 euros. Like, wow, okay.
Yes, big pieces. I must admit, I've got a lot of amber myself, and a lot of it is raw and completely unpolished, which I've never got around to polishing. I don't know what's in them. I must admit, I didn't buy them for bling. I bought them for insects inside them. I mean, the unwashed stuff or sea-washed amber I particularly like, because it just has that sort of natural appearance to it. But I was particularly excited to go to Gdansk, because if there are any fans of the game or book series The Witcher, a lot of the city of Novigrad was based on Gdansk, particularly things like the medieval crane. So I was just in my element, going around like, I recognise that.
That makes sense.
Good fun.
Good.
Well, you're talking about big lumps of amber that cost.
I was going to ask about cosplay, but I think I probably better move along.
Oh God, yes. No, one of the things, the Stonehenge exhibition. Actually, you made some stuff for that. But there was one particular piece that was an amber goblet, and I wondered, maybe it's more a question for him, but it's a cup size piece of amber, and my first thought looking at this stunning piece of work was, number one, how many attempts? I mean, is it possible that how many would you have got? Would you have not broken something to get the walls to a relative thinness? I was just blown away by how long that must have taken, and the size of piece of amber in the first place. I mean, so it might not be a good analogy at all, but you take, when you're making a flint axe like the one you made for that Michael has got somewhere in there. So you're making an axe this big, and you're starting off with a lump of flint that is however many times larger. And I wondered if that was the case with amber as well, that just staggering to work with finding a piece of amber that size. I've never seen a piece of amber that size.
Yeah. We actually went to the Amber Museum that they have there in Gdansk, and some of the pieces are massive, but they can be massive pieces, but for it to be flawless through the middle without any cracks, that you could make a cup, because you can't easily melt amber. It's not like, it's broken a bit, we'll just apply a bit of heat. You need huge amounts of pressure as well as heat to sort of rejoin amber. It's not like copal or resin that you can just melt. So it would be a one go at it. So it would have to be quite a chunk. Because it's like the likelihood is the outside might have some bits that might not work so cleanly, but it is an amazing thing. The Hove Amber Cup that's in Brighton Museum for anyone that's not come across it. But there are actually two amber cups. There isn't just the one. Ooh. So, and if you start to look at it, there are more and more of these sort of Costa Coffee type mugs out there. Some are made of amber, some are made of shale. We've almost certainly got we definitely have got lots of pottery ones. And there are even silver ones from France from the early Bronze Age. So there are a variety for the likes of the gold Rilliton or Ringlemere cups, and plenty of, as I said, shale and other materials. So The amber cup fits within a group of very, very high value vessels for your coffee.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, it must have been a staggering possession to have back in the day. I mean,
yeah, most definitely. I mean, I would love. I think we did actually look at, not to seriously go into it, but just to try and gauge how much either amber or I guess budget you would need to create something like that. And you're looking at in excess of 25k sterling or euros for something big enough. Yeah. And pieces like that seldom wash up from the North Sea. Very, very rarely. I mean, you do get the odd piece on our coastline that does wash up, and further to the south in Suffolk, in places like Shingle Street, it washes up. But they're generally much, much smaller pieces. So whether this piece came from further into the Baltic, who knows? I imagine there'll be some way of tracing it eventually in the future.
Talking of valuable materials, I mean, flint itself, it's quite ubiquitous and fairly readily available. So it doesn't quite, but massively important nonetheless. It's not quite the same case with obsidian. You know that we've been pursuing, as far as we can, the obsidian story, because we think it's very important as far as the early farmers were concerned, and certainly moving into the Aegean, etc. But I've not got a feel for the availability of obsidian, useful obsidian anyway, and what kind of value back in prehistory that could be placed on it, and what makes it so important. Do you have a feel for that?
Yeah, and obsidian's an interesting one because it has quite different characteristics to flint, and I guess I'm saying sort of different in the sense that they're both very sharp, workable materials, but from an appearance point of view, they're quite different things, and you can achieve some things with obsidian that you can't with flint, like making mirrors from it.
Yeah.
And there's quite an ethereal sort of connection to this quite literally jet black material that does have an otherworldly feel to it. And even when you flake it down, that just from something that looked jet black, you've taken a flake off and you hold it up and it's not really dark at all. It's just sort of mildly translucent.
Yes.
It's not black.
So that was a surprise, because you've sent us those blades. Maybe I'll get to show them. That was
absolutely.
The surprise for me.
So it's a weird material, and I quite like some of the Aztec belief system that's based around obsidian, that their underworld is sort of this rain of sharp obsidian shards in the underworld. That there must have been amazing belief systems elsewhere in Europe that may have been connected to flint, possibly, but I don't think it perhaps would have had quite the same agency or intensity that you get with obsidian. It is this almost otherworldly material, and it is amazing to work. It's just a shame we just don't have anywhere near us in Europe. I think the nearest source would be somewhere like Sicily or Turkey or the far side of Eastern Europe. We would have to go a long way. We do get the likes of Arran pitchstone, but it's just nothing like it at all. So it is a special material. I mean, working glass is almost identical, just normal blocks of glass, but it's not the same stuff.
A random question from a few comments below. Who was it? The question was, have you ever met Phil Harding?
That's random.
Yes. A few times. Yeah, no, I've met Phil Harding a few times.
Yeah.
I think I've met him several times filming Time Team episodes. Yeah, all sorts of settings.
I don't know where Lance Biker was going with that question. It's a yes or no, isn't it? I met him once. Do you remember the first archaeological conference that we went to, Rupert? Was it Sunrise Over the Stones down there? I found myself standing next to him, and as soon as I mentioned I ran a podcast, he ran away.
He did run away, yes.
I should have taken a leaf out of that book.
Yeah, he didn't want to be pressed on anything, did he? He didn't want to be on the spot. So we
Yeah,
didn't
fair
choose him.
enough.
I've
when you're
always
in the
got on
public
with
eye.
Phil.
Yeah.
He definitely has his sort of grumpy moments if you catch him at the wrong time. But I think one of my the earliest times that I met him, I think it was in London of all places, and it might have been a conference, but he insisted afterwards that I think my dad even took me, that we went to a pub afterwards, because he wanted a pint of Spitfire from one of the nearby pubs, and he sort of brought me one as well, because we got on quite well, and sort of like, yeah, he's 15. He's like, oh, it'll be all right. Yeah, okay, yeah. Nice guy.
What a guy! Yeah.
So yes, I have met Phil. I think most of the Time team I've met or worked with a few times, but I think the even very last Time team episode, which was their Britain's Bronze Age mummy special, was working on that. So that was a few odd evenings of a really weird setting, but it's always good fun.
Good stuff. So what are you actually working on at the moment? What's the big stuff going on for you at the moment?
What can I tell you that I'm working on? Well, caught me in a moment there. What can I tell you? What can I not tell you?
That's the trouble, isn't it? When you're working with blooming media.
Yeah. I might have to come back to that one. Just thinking off the top of my head, unless. Em's just reminded me. We have done some filming with Oxford Archaeology for that, as I was talking about, for that handling collection for Upper Paleolithic stuff. That was quite fun. It's been a few things, but there is some TV stuff, some book stuff going on. That's about as much as I can tell you.
All right.
We have got some really cool events in the planning, as I said. We're going to be back in North Wales again in June, back at Brynkethley.
Okay.
Which is always good fun. And this year, and although I'm reminding myself of the likely hardship of planning it, in the past, we've done sort of a living history display, more of a passive thing that people can come and watch. This year, we're going to do more of a performance, a 2-part performance. One's going to be exploring the Neolithic, one's going to be exploring the Bronze Age, morning and then afternoon.
Wow.
That's going to be something to come and watch, because we're really going to make that quite a thing.
When you say performance, can you say more? Would that?
I can do. We will be showing off my, I guess, grasp of interpretive dance. Again, not sure why you're laughing.
Because I want to know what you're wearing when you do it. That's why.
He's obsessed.
Yeah, I know. Just slightly unnerving, really. It's too early in the day for that kind of thing. If we were
obviously, I need to be there with a camera.
4:00, it would be like, way, but no. We will be showing off a variety of skills, I guess, without giving too much away. We have got a few special things planned. I've been trying to work out how I can bring child sacrifice into the performance, but I've got plenty of work to do to try and work out how to bring that in. I do like to shock people as well as inspire them sometimes. But there we go.
Okay, well, maybe you'll find
prehistory wasn't all fun and nice. I'm afraid, folks.
You might find a few volunteers on Anglesey. You never know.
Never know. Yeah, drop off your child.
You never know.
What's the name of the event? I've forgotten. Is it?
So it is. This is where I actually check my calendar, because it would make more sense to actually say the date, because I don't think it's even listed online yet. But it is usually called the Brynkethley Open Day or Solstice event, and it's on the 14th of June.
I think I had plans to join you there a couple of years ago, or 3 years ago.
We were going to. Something actually happened.
Can't rely on anybody.
Because we were going to do it.
It's always something that comes up.
I think it was something dramatic that happened. I can't remember what it was.
What,
anyway,
COVID?
No, okay. No,
it wasn't.
It was probably something a lot more somber, so we don't need to go there.
Sure.
Did you say the 14th? During the 14th?
14th, yeah. After the Saturday, we will be at the Great Orme doing casting workshops, that'll be fun in itself. I think there's only 1 or 2 places left on that for the casting workshop, so if that's your thing, I would get over there quick because they do sell out very fast. But that's always fun. We have got a couple of Ice Age events here and there, so that'll always be fun. I think we're going to be at Cliff Castle up in the Midlands to see out the Festival of Archaeology with the Council of British Archaeology, and that's in July, I think. So yeah, as I said, it'd be worth going over to our calendar page because that's when we have all that kind of stuff. But other than that, we do, of course, have our own workshops. And then, I really hope that you guys will come and join us because, I mean, if anything, just to go for a walk on Haysborough, now I can, I guess, grab it.
Yeah.
We had, I'm sure you've come across David Abram, the photographer who does the sort of aerial archaeology pieces. That in fact we have a couple of bits of his work in the house, and he was doing a talk in Norwich for some of his new work. And the next day we insisted that they came over and we went for a walk at Haysborough. And it's a beach that I've walked up and down for hours and hours, hundreds of hours maybe, and never been lucky. Whereas the first time Em went for a walk at Haysborough, she found a hand axe because sod's lib, which is just ridiculous. So I've always been sore about that ever since. And when we stood at the top of the beach, and if you know it, you'll know the car park that looks down, always perilously close. We looked at the top, and it was very sandy, no gravel at all. So I thought our chance of finding anything is slim. But lo and behold, on the walk back, I saw a little teardrop shape in the sand, and it turned out to be this.
Oh my!
Which is not on camera, but is now.
Oh my goodness!
Sort of. So there we go. I found my Haysborough hand axe, which is only a little thing, but I'm still very, very proud of it. So I've been able to break the Napper's curse, which in my mind, the Napper's curse was to be able to make but never find. So there we go. That sits proudly behind my, my desk.
Oh, that's fabulous. What's the material there?
So it's flint, and it's probably either come from what would have been the Thames Paleo Channel. But we get the hand axes that appear at this lovely sort of slight greeny, yellowy colour.
Well, I was going to say, maybe going a bit off into the weeds here, but do you get any Cumbrian greenstone axe heads turning up in Norfolk?
Not a huge amount. They do. But not very many, and they're generally very small. I have got a lot of records to go to, because if you end up having a look on the Norfolk Heritage Explorer and really narrow down the filters down to Neolithic, you will see that there is an absolutely crazy amount of axe heads that have been found around here, because they've had an awful lot of potato or vegetable picking by hand in sort of the 20th century or earlier, so people would find them as they were picking through, and a lot of them are labelled as axe heads, and sometimes they have a picture, sometimes they have very little, but I would imagine there is a huge amount of different lithic types, including greenstone and Langdale tuff. It would not surprise me.
I mean, because I have it in Sorry, Rupert?
Abby Sue just asked. How do you
yes.
date surface finds? It's a lovely question.
It's a very good question. And if I was to find, let's say, an axe head on the surface of a field, without trying to, I guess, give it too much away for where that could be, you'd have a few different options immediately. So let's say with the one I found, if I sort of move out the way a little bit, you can see that it's this sort of teardrop shape as I try and hold it in a visual way, and I can see that there are no points on it where it's been broken, so that's pretty much the shape it would have been. Probably might have had a centimetre extra around the outside from where it's been knocked about, so it's almost certainly not an axe head that would have been fitted into a wooden handle. So probably not Neolithic. We also don't really get hand axes in the Neolithic, or even earlier. So it's more likely, with the profile it has and the amount of wear that it has, to be Paleolithic. But what part of the Paleolithic? Now that can start to get a bit tricky. It's probably not from the upper Paleolithic, because modern humans like us, perhaps less so Rupert, but Michael and I as modern humans, we did not, I sort of say the royal we, did not make hand axes in northwest Europe, so that's unlikely to be from the upper Paleolithic. Now Neanderthals did make hand axes, but right at the end of their timeline they went back to using hand axes, and it could fit in that group, but it's more likely that it fits into the lower Paleolithic, where many hand axes were found, or were made rather, and have been found from that time. But when it comes to just a flake, for example, that's where it can start to get tricky, and that's where I'd really have to rely on my experience as a flint knapper or just as a lithics specialist to start to identify whether it was a flake that had been detached with experienced hands, because if it had just been roughly bashed, then either it's been made by an inexperienced napper, which is possible, or it dates to the Bronze Age, where almost all nappers were rubbish. There was a handful of good nappers left, but not very many. But you can sometimes see where flakes have been detached from making certain tools or shapes, and that can give you an indication. And then you just have to start to look at the area around you. For my hand axe, it came from Haysborough, and I know that there's a huge amount of Paleolithic archaeology that have been found in that area. But if you just found it in a flake or an axe in a field, that's where it can be quite tricky. But there'll often be features that can give you a bit of a sense if it is just a flake. If it's something like an arrowhead, that can be really quite obvious, even to a specific part of a time period.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant, thank you for that. That was actually a much longer answer than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So no, not apologise, because unless you have the knowledge to do the typology, the depth of that knowledge, it's a dating stuff. A surface find is a non-starter.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's where those specialists in those particular fields are really useful. I was even out on a field walk recently, and people were starting to pick up large flakes with no diagnostic tools, and they were sort of passing them to me, saying, what do you think they could be? And I was starting to get a very strong early Neolithic feel for the quality of the flakes, the size of them, the way they prepared the platforms, and they looked like flakes that had been detached during axe manufacture. And although you get axe head, as in a wooden handle axe, from throughout the Neolithic, you generally get a much higher concentration of axe production in the early Neolithic. And lo and behold, towards the end of the day, someone found half a leaf arrowhead from the early Neolithic. So you get a feel for it. You usually need a sample that grows. Working off one thing is quite tricky, but a large sample can give you an idea.
Abby Sue says, so if I found a Dilley axe, it wouldn't have the use wear.
No, it would have the freshness and will have the echoes within its flinty skin of usually my bad language being shouted at it if the flint was misbehaving. But we, in fact, had a very good hand axe day yesterday, so we'll try and put some video and pictures of those hand axes being made, because some of the hand axes that came out yesterday were real stunners. So we'll put them on social media. So if you fancy one of them, just message me and you can have the one that we post a picture of.
Nice. I think it's only fair to show this, actually. That Nigel has obviously known you of old. I urge you all to go on James's napping courses and discover that it's not as easy as it looks. Yes, there you go.
Yes, I think we had a full-on day when Nigel came to visit the workshop. It was one of those where we've had sort of people come to the workshop and we just thought, I can connect with you absolutely. I know the hardship you're going through, but like me, I guess discovered that actually it's really rewarding once you start to get past some of those trickier stages. So no, it was an enjoyable workshop. I look forward to seeing Nigel on a future one, or just to come and say hello at an event. Please do. next time you're in the area.
I mean, you've created a wonderful job for yourself. Which part of the job do you most look forward to doing? Because it's so multifaceted, isn't it?
Yeah, that was a good pun as well.
You noticed.
Yeah, which part of the job? I mean, it varies. It really varies, because there can be certain objects or replicas that I've been trying to make for some time. And usually it's within the bronze casting world, because there are certain, like the really long hollow spears or certain sword types that I've had to work on different methods for making it. And sometimes they've taken multiple casting attempts to work out how to make them without over engineering them, and you get to the end and you think, yes, okay, I've done it, the satisfaction, amazing. But that's, I guess, within the replicas world, and there is nothing quite like sitting outside in the workshop in a warm day, just with the sunshine on you working. Beautiful. And you can just hear the chickens and, you know, the oyster catchers flying overhead. It's just perfect. And if you've got the radio on behind you and a cold beer, then even better. That it's just, yeah, please, summer, hurry up. But
you've sold it to me. You've sold it to me.
I know. I'm doing all I can. Those beers are waiting for me. But anyway, I think the bit that I enjoy is doing the media side of archaeology, because I was inspired as a kid watching, I think it was John Lord, who was on TV, and he's still going in his mid 80s, still going quite very, very strong. So it just shows you that napping keeps you fit. So that's what I'm clinging to anyway. But it was seeing someone like that showing something difficult, but in such an effortless way, as is often shown with crafts on TV, that for me as a kid, I wanted to be able to do that. So to be able to complete that cycle, that I can be that person to encourage the next generation, is really fulfilling. And TV, when it's good and it is a nice project, is really good fun. And working with the likes of Michaela or Steve Backshaw, they were both really, really great. And I think, Steve and I got on really like that, because we had to. Once we flown over to Germany, I then had to drive him several hours to our filming location. So had we have not got on, that would have been quite challenging. But no, we absolutely got on, to the extent that I think we'd done the first couple of scenes and just absolutely nailed it first go. And then for the one time that I just sort of slightly fluffed what I was going to say, he was like, yeah, that's really great, let's do it again, but just not fuck it up. Like, right, okay, you've obviously got my sense of humour, Steve. So it's nice. It's good fun.
Wonderful when that happens. I think we're winding up to the sort of last questions that we'll take. We just had this one from Andrew, who asks, do you think the tanged and barbed arrowheads were more than just an arrowhead?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Cool. From a variety of different angles, because they were being made at a time when wild hunted animals were quite rare, in the sense that they don't appear in the faunal record anywhere near as frequently as domesticated animals. So the fact that you get so many suggests that they were for something more than that. And the fact that they frequently turn up in burial assemblages in pristine condition as a set suggests that, as well as them being a functional arrowhead, they were almost certainly an object of status and power. And you see that mirrored in some of the beaker daggers that are even rarer, but do turn up in burial assemblages. That recent useware analysis has shown that most of them were only taken out and back into sheaths. They were not used for cutting. So a bit like those arrowheads, it's almost certainly objects of status or power. Or even perhaps a special ceremonial connection, that they're made specially for burial, or some of them anyway. But interestingly, also for Ötzi's arrows, the useware on the arrowheads showed that they were clearly used for cutting tasks, small cutting tasks on plant fibre. So we think of arrowheads just being these things that you ping at a fleeing prey, but no, they can be small cutting tools as well. people were almost certainly seeing tools in the same way we do. I mean, the amount of times that we, and me definitely, have been in a situation, I need a hammer, I'm going to use the back of this screwdriver or something, or I'm going to use the wrong size this to do this, but it works, and blow it, we'll just do it that way. And one thing I absolutely love from prehistory, particularly when it comes to tools, is that people throughout time are blooming lazy, so lazy. Whether it be us as modern humans, Neanderthals, the laziness connects us all so strongly. And when you see it in the archaeology, that's where you see the humanity. That's where you have that connection, where for a Neanderthal site where they've just put up with using the local rubbish quality quartz. You get some amazing quartz out there in the world, but they're just the local from granite rubbish quartz, rather than walking 8 miles to get hold of some really amazing quality flint that would have been on their route. But no, we just use the local stuff.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, it's got to be said. I have in the drawer, we were given, it was a very nice present. It's a beautiful box of cheese knives. Just all different cheese knives for cutting different kinds of cheese. Do you know what? Never comes out the box, because you just use the knife that you've already got. And it's not like anybody's going to put them in my burial, but you know what I mean. It's I think we can over-ritualise these ideas sometimes. I don't know.
Or you might be buried with them as a set. You'll be the cheese chieftain.
Exactly.
I mean, you do live in France at the moment, so that would be
true too, yes.
Chipper Chat says, used the back of my drill as a hammer today, lol.
See, that is humanity in a story. It's if I was in the setting a bit in the future where I need to write lots of books because my arms are too knackered from napping, that I would definitely be making a book that based around the history of laziness.
Yeah. Just one last question from the comments here before we sort of wrap up, and we've got one more question for you from us, I think, James. But Joris asks, and it's a bit of an open-ended question. He said he saw your bow drill on your site, and I was wondering about your thoughts on woodworking, such as bowl carving.
That is a good one, because the pump drills are amazing, and hopefully we're going to be doing something towards that in the future, possibly for a bigger project that will perhaps come up another time. But for when M in particular has been using the pump drills to recreate some of the prehistoric jewellery, the quality and depth and narrowness of the drill holes that you can achieve is just incredible. But then you look at some of the originals. I mean, for the jet sort of concentric necklaces that you see, I mean, they're drilling 1 mil or less holes that are crisscrossing each other perfectly through a little jet plate that is less than a centimetre in thickness, and they're getting these perfectly aligned drill holes. And you look at it on an X-ray and you think, well, how the hell are they achieving that? And then you see some of the drilling equipment and the way that they could have been set up, and it's like, actually, that's really quite simple, but goodness me, it's effective.
It wasn't aliens then?
No, sadly not. I'm sorry to disappoint, but I guess it just shows that there is some amazing engineering going on, sometimes on a very small scale, that with some basic thinking and approach, often you can achieve an awful lot. But for drilling for wood, that is an interesting one, because I've made a very large pump drill before for Jersey, for their longhouse at Le Hugby Museum, and actually they struggled with it. There wasn't enough momentum that they could generate. The problem they were finding, that as the drill bit was going round, it was getting caught on the wood fibre quite a lot. And with a pump drill, because you're relying on the momentum of the rope pulling the drill back, and then as you pump it down, it pulls it the other way, it doesn't work quite as effectively. And actually you see that in the archaeology, that where people need to cut holes in things, they're just using gouges or other sort of hollowing percussive tools. They're not drilling through soft materials. And you can do it, but for big holes, it's quite a challenge. With something like a bow drill, you can achieve that, because you're essentially just relying on the power from your body rather than just momentum and reverse momentum item on a string. But certainly even with bronze tools and bronze drills, we've just found chipping out holes is quicker, and for the archaeology. And I guess for another project that we're doing, we finished the Bronze Age boats at Stanwick Lakes in Northampton, which worked really, really well. We're now hoping to make a Bronze Age trackway into one of the lakes as well. Wow. That's going to be the next big project. So people can come along, they can sort of cast off their ritual offering, bronze sword, child, you name it. They'll be there, ready.
James, it's been fantastic talking to you. We've covered an awful lot of ground, and I get the feeling that there's a lot of ground that we could still cover. So we must make another date at some point. And
in Norfolk,
with Norfolk, cameras,
yeah. Do you know what?
And stuff.
Yeah, we're gonna have to make it happen. Yeah, that'd
be well cool. We've got one more question for you. You're going to take it. You know what it is, Rupert, don't you?
No. Do I? Am I having a senior moment?
Well, I think you'd... Well, all right. So I'll spur your memory. I mean, it's interesting because this is... Because usually we ask this of, archaeologist guests, and it's a different question for them. But for you, having sort of lived in some of these periods by cosplay, whatever, or by
here we go,
or by learning what they were making and how they were making it and the materials and all the rest of it, and having done a bit of the demonstration of how people lived. If you could go back in time, where would you feel safest? Where would you feel best able to cope going back in time to?
That's a good question, because that's slightly different to similar questions that I've had before, which in the past, when it's, well, when would you like to go back in time to, that is different to when you
could answer it that way if you like.
No, that's fine. That's a more interesting way of looking at it, because when would I feel safe or safest? Probably, that is such a good question, because if you went back into the Paleolithic or Mesolithic, the frequency of violence is low and the population density is equally low, which is why there's the thinking that when the Neolithic arrived, that the Mesolithic population would genetically replace so quickly, that the population of them was just so small. So would you be more likely to be accepted or supported by Mesolithic groups if I could sort of be like, well, look, I can do what you do. I can't, understand you yet, but I wonder if I'd be able to get along. But in the Neolithic or Bronze Age, when things were a lot more violent, I wonder whether I would be able to, immediately get on with these people, whether they would just see me as potentially a threat immediately and just try and take me out. It is interesting, because I would love to go back to watch how they were casting some of the really tricky cast objects, like some of the bronze horns, or how they were beating some of the sheet metal to make some of the amazing Mycenaean armor sets that you get. It's outside my area, which is mostly northwestern Europe, but to see the armor being made for whoever was the Achilles of the day, or Hector, that would be an amazing thing. And we were lucky to sort of see something like that when we were in Vietnam, not for a set of armor, but to watch a very, very large bronze thing being cast using charcoal furnaces and clay crucibles into clay molds was just stunning. Health and safety was just like none. But it was just incredible. I think that was one of the most exciting days. And Em's got it all on camera of me just running round, with just looking as if I'm absolutely high as a kite, just with excitement.
Fantastic. Wow.
Oh, brilliant. I meant to ask you about Vietnam, but maybe we'll save that for another time. And health and safety in the Neolithic discussed.
Yes.
Wonderful stuff. Rupert, you got anything else before we sign off?
No. I just I think that we did. I mean, we plugged James's website again. So Ancient Crafts UK on social media, and Something else that we were going to mention, and I think it's important that we do, is James. You mentioned in an email about the Tomb of the Eagles.
Oh, yes. I remember.
And yes, almost forgot really. But I know that many of you folks are very aware of the Tomb of the Eagles. They're actually there is a fundraising thing going on that they're trying to raise the money to get that up and running again and reopen it to the public. And do you remember where is it a dedicated website, or is it on which fundraising platform is it? Do you remember?
So if you just go on to whichever search engine you prefer and put in Tomb of the Eagles crowdfunder, it will come straight at the top of the list. Or even if you put Tomb of the Eagles, it will still come up high up. But if you put Tomb of the Eagles crowdfunder, it will be straight at the top, and it will be on the crowdfunder website. So it's official, as it were.
Yeah.
But what they're hoping to do is, for the South Ronaldsay community, as a group, they're hoping to buy the farm and the structure and the tomb itself and the land around it, so that they can redevelop it, not just reopen it, but redevelop it to make it a new, exciting space. Because, I mean, I can remember going to Orkney as a kid and going in to see the sisters in their own house and museum, essentially. And what an experience to go along the little cart and pull yourself along. I mean, it was absolutely Enid Blyton adventure stuff for people of all ages. So to reopen that as a site would be absolutely amazing. It's such a good cause because it is such a special site, and gives people not just because there are so many special sites, but for the connection that people build with a site like that through that experience is worthwhile saving. So even if you can donate a small amount, I would strongly recommend you do so that thousands of people over the next however many years and generations can benefit from it. It's a really good cause, and we're proud to help support with that.
I wonder if they'll be able to reinstate some of the artifacts, because the museum was stocked with artifacts from the excavation that Ronald Simonson did way back then, which some would argue should have been taken care of in a museum
it's a very
somewhere.
Contentious area, isn't it?
I just wonder.
I'm not going to name any names, I don't think, but no, have actually had significant disagreements about whether the big museums should take ownership of everything and always have it behind glass. When the girls are putting things in people's hands so that they can genuinely experience something. And, I think that there is an awful lot to be said for allowing people that depth of experience with stuff. I personally don't think that everything should be behind glass in a museum.
Absolutely. It's a really difficult one, and I think it comes down to assessing what the artifact is, because there are some objects that are so valuable, even just from a raw sense, that they're going to attract trouble. So if it's, let's say, a gold torque that happens to be stolen from a small provincial museum, the security that they might have is clearly not going to be anywhere near to the same level as a national museum, because they've got a much smaller budget. But let's say this one artifact that's gold is stolen because it's gold and it's going to attract attention. Well, that's it. It's gone, and it'll probably be melted down because it'll be too hot to touch. But if it's an object that is being kept in a community or being allowed to be handled because there are lots of them, it doesn't have a raw material value, so the likelihood of it being stolen is far less, then it's giving a community not just the ability for people to come and handle something, but for them to go and see and be aware of something that is part of the place that they live, that gives them where they live, and for visitors that sense of identity.
Truly.
Because even for where Em and I grew up, we have the village of Meldrith near us, with the train station that she would get on, and I would go past from Royston on our way into school. And underneath the station was the Meldrith Hoard, which gives its name to a particular kind of socketed axe. But that hoard is now in the British Museum, and I've never seen it. I'd love to see it. Yeah. But wouldn't it be great if it occasionally came out to Meldreth, so that people who almost certainly don't know about it could see it? Yes. And as you said, for people to actually handle something, so long as the potential damage is assessed, and either that you say that, well, we've got lots of this. If it's damaged and worn, so be it. We've got lots of this particular type of object, and the community impact people will have is far, far more valuable than just having the object available for study, because we've got lots of it. What's the value in that as such? It's an object, but if it's an object people can engage with, it becomes more than an object. It becomes something that is part of a living archaeology rather than dead, essentially.
Yeah. Well said.
Very good words. I didn't quite mean it to spin off into the associated issues to do with it, but I'm sort of glad we did. It's an interesting one. I do hope, that there is facility for some of those artifacts.
I would imagine so.
I would hope so, because it's a wonderful and special site to visit. Anyway. For the moment, though, I think that's it. It's time to draw a line. Sadly,
thank you so much, James.
Delight chatting with you.
Very welcome.
Yes, it's always good to see you, and we'll have to sort something out about coming to see you in Norfolk.
Yes.
Different.
Let's get a
beer.
date in the diary at some point.
Yes, indeed. So, to our Patreon audience, thank you for being with us. Thank you for your comments, and thank you for your chat. If you're watching the recording, thank you for making it through thus far. Glad you're with us. You've been with us. Don't forget to subscribe, do the like thing, and check out the links down below, because we've mentioned a few things during the course of the conversation, not least of which, of course, is the link to our Patreon page and the Buy Me a Coffee page, which supports our GÖBEKLI TEPE to Stonehenge project. That's enough of that. It's goodbye from me, and it's...
Goodbye from me,
goodbye,
and it's...
See ya.
Take care, everybody. Thanks again, James. Cheers.
Bye for now.